recognize our incredible chair, the Reverend Dr. Tamara E. Wilson. Ma'am, please stand. A special thank you to the amazing women of the Banneker-Douglass Museum Foundation, who without them, we would not be able to do the amazing programming that we do. Our chair, Ms. Beryl Hall, and to the staff of the Banneker-Douglass Museum. We have a small but mighty staff here, and they do an incredible job making sure that our programs are done with excellence and authenticity. Our curator extraordinaire, Ms. Shalisa Howard. I added the extraordinaire part. She doesn't have that on her business card, but she did. And our marketing director, which is how you all probably got here today, Ms. Jan Lee. I'd also want to recognize our administrative manager, who should write a book on hospitality services, Mr. LaRon Herbert. And our beloved security guard / local historian / all things excellence, Mr. Ted Hyman, who many of you met downstairs. And I would be remiss if I did not recognize and thank the hard work of the Vice Chair of the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. You see the shirt, Morgan State University professor, Dr. And I would say this, this exhibition, The Radical Voice of Blackness, has meant so much to this institution, engaging people of all backgrounds, of all ages, to explore the history of Black resistance, Black joy, and methods of healing. So I'm going to give a heartfelt thank you to the artists, Devin Allen, Chrystal Seawood, and Wesley Clark. Thank you for your brilliance, your artistry, and dedication to authentically preserving the beauty of our story and our communities. And to the incredible guest curator, the Myrtis Bedolla. Thank you, Ms. Bedolla, for your curatorial genius and dedication to amplifying the brilliance of Black artists in our great state. I'm going to read a little bit about her bio before I bring her up, or before she gets started. Myrtis Bedolla is the owner and founding director of Galerie Myrtis. Raise your hand if you've ever been to Galerie Myrtis. Yeah. Raise your hand if you're going to go to Galerie Myrtis. It is an emerging blue chip gallery and art advisory specializing in 20th century and 21st century American art with a focus on African American artists. Bedolla possesses over 30 years of experience as a curator, gallerist, mentor, teacher, educator, trailblazer, and art consultant. So without further ado, Ms. Bedolla.
Chanel, thank you for gifting me with this opportunity to present these amazing artists out of the 17, these 3 geniuses here, whose works are compelling and powerful storytelling in the legacy of and the contemporary expressions of our resistance, joy, and methods of healing. So to put the exhibition into context, I'm just going to read an excerpt from my curatorial statement, and then we'll begin our discussion with Devin Allen, Chrystal Seawood, and Wesley Clark. So the radical voice of Blackness speaks to, I'm sorry? Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a mic, so let me know if I need to project my voice more. I'll be happy to do that. The radical voice of Blackness speaks to resistance and joy, explores America's fraught history of systemic racism while celebrating the resiliency of a people who have persevered despite social and political devices to suppress them. Here, the joyous moments of Black life and quotidian experiences that honor the Black family are celebrated through expressions of healing, leisure, and joy. Artists pay homage to the grit and determination of a people to maintain their civility despite systems of oppression, and in so doing, declare autonomy over Blackness, reclaiming it from negative connotations and, in its place, affirming its morality, dignity, and pride. The exhibition honors Maryland icons such as abolitionists and social reformer. I'm sorry, I'm just going to advance here. Frederick Douglass, and acknowledges the contributions of social reformer Dr. Lily Mae Carroll Jackson, organizer of the Baltimore branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. So, as our conversation begins, I'll introduce Devin Allen. He is a Baltimore-based, born and bred photographer who gained national recognition for his documentation of the protests and unrest that occurred in the aftermath of the death of Freddie Gray in police custody in Baltimore in 2015. Allen's photos, which were featured on the cover of Time magazine, captured the raw emotions and the human stories behind the protests and helped to bring attention to the issues of police brutality and systemic racism that were at the heart of the protests. Since then, Allen has continued to document the lives and stories of people in Baltimore and beyond, using his camera to shed light on the struggles and triumphs of communities that are often overlooked and marginalized. In this exhibition, his works speak to the resistance and joy. The photographs reveal acts of joy and resistance woven into the everyday life of African Americans. In quoting from the artist's statement he wrote on these words, "It's a part of our DNA, finding joy even in the darkest moments. We live, fight, and love from our street corners to the front lines. Born into a society that has been built to crush us, we find ways to not only exist, but navigate and survive." Devin, those are really powerful words. In your recent book, which is No Justice, No Peace, a plug for the book. You explore the history and culture of Baltimore and the ways in which the city has been shaped by inequality and resilience. In your introduction, you share how your family's love, the gift of a cabinet from your grandmother, and Baltimore have shaped you, and how photography transformed your life. Tell us what inspired you to become a photographer.
I kind of stumbled into it. It was, I always tell people, art was something that wasn't really offered to us in my community. Maybe had like one art class. It's like draw a square, you draw these lines, now you got a key. A+. And it's interesting because when I meet a lot of my peers that are photographers, they, in white schools they had like dark rooms and all these things. We didn't have those things. And I had a friend, he was the star athlete, straight A student. I was the kid that didn't apply, so could have been a straight A student, but I was a knucklehead. But he went to the Army, and we took different routes, and we came back together as young adults. And I was a party promoter, and while he was in Iraq, he fell in love with poetry. And he was like, "You're a party promoter. I want to do a poetry night. Let's do it." And I was like, "I don't know anything about poetry." He was like, "Trust me, women love poetry. That's all you need to know." And we started a poetry night, and actually, around the same time, poetry, I wasn't good at it. I sucked. It was horrible. But I started gravitating towards photography because he inspired me, introduced me to art. And I started Googling famous black photographers, and the first person that popped up was Gordon Parks. And I just seen him with his pipe, hair slicked back, and this guy's cool. And then I seen his work on Muhammad Ali, the gangs in Harlem. I said, I want to be this guy. And, I remember marching into my grandmother's house, and she was like, "You want something, you don't just come see me for no reason." And I said, "I want to be a photographer," and that was in 2013, and she helped me get my first camera. And around that same time, I had transformed, and where I used to hang on the corner all day, I found myself exploring Baltimore behind the lens, and it kind of put a kind of like a wedge between me and some of my childhood friends, because of the transition of finding something that I was passionate about. They didn't understand. And sadly enough, after a month of having my camera, one of my friends was murdered. And I went to go pay respects to his mom, and then when I left, they murdered my other friend. And if I wasn't adamant about going out and taking pictures that day, I would have been with my friend, and I probably wouldn't be here today. And that's when I sat out and said that I was going to do this for the rest of my life. And I kind of found my voice in it. I lost a friend to police brutality, Sean Gantz, who was murdered in Baltimore City in 2011. I didn't see the power in going to a protest. But when Mike Brown passed and then Freddie Gray, it was different. You know, the camera gave me a voice, and I wanted to use my art to tell that story. And that's, you know, what I've been adamant about my entire career since then.
Many of your photos in the book capture moments of joy and celebration, as well as moments of pain and struggle. How do you approach capturing such a range of emotions? And what do you hope viewers take away from seeing these images?
Yeah, when I first started documenting, I didn't know what I was, you know, I just go to parks is my moral compass with everything. You know, we use the camera as a weapon, and that's what I wanted to use it for. But as I documented, you know, I'm a part of the community. This is my home, but I became kind of like an outsider from outside the snow globe looking in. And I started understanding the power that I had, that I'm speaking for people, and I'm dictating how people see my community. You know, I'm controlling the narrative, and I wanted to make sure that any story that I tell is just honest. And a lot of times with media, you know, to quote one of my best friends, D. Watkins, you know, we want to speak for ourselves, but we don't have those platforms. We all in Baltimore, in so many places like Baltimore, media always tell us what we are. You know, anywhere I go, the first thing they say, Baltimore like the wire. That's all they know, but it's so much more than that. You know, they don't know about the sitting on the stoop and the love and the passion, you know, the community, you know, the pride that you can see the hat. I'm from West Baltimore. It's a pride that comes with that, knowing that my grandmother came up, you know, from North Carolina as a teenager. My family been in West Baltimore ever since I'm third generation. I take pride in that. So I wanted to show that through the imagery. So I wanted to show strength, resilience, love, compassion, and shed light on these things that aren't a part of the conversation. You know, media, if it bleeds, it leads, and that's what gets it the greatness. You know, a lot of times they want to show us showing love and, you know, embracing each other. And in my community, the reason why I am here is because Freddie Gray died. I became successful, but that vehicle that was given to me was put in this position by my community because they trusted me and allowed me to tell that story. And that's from love and growing up with these people in Baltimore. And I want to make sure that the imagery speaks to that.
It does.
It's all right.
It's all right.
It's all right.
Your photographs of protests and unrest in Baltimore in 2015 received national attention and helped to spark a national conversation about police brutality and systemic racism. And we're looking at the image of the city girl. Can you talk to us about what that experience was like for you and how it has influenced your work since then?
It was, I didn't know, you know, I got my first camera in 2013, and here I am, 2015, you know, me and Freddie Gray share mutual friends. That's how small Baltimore is. You know, I could easily be Freddie Gray, and I felt like nobody could tell this story better than me, but I did not know what I was walking into. It actually broke me, you know, and it's something that I speak out often, definitely post. You think about George Floyd, when the whole country was on fire. I already had been through it, but I felt alone going through it. our places didn't understand. I think the closest people that understood were activists and people on the ground in Ferguson at that time. I was suicidal, I was depressed, I wasn't eating right, I wasn't sleeping right. You have these moments where it's kind of like a call to action, and everyone wants you there. And it's like you have to find balance in between that. It's something I learned over time. But I think the darkest moment for me, was taking these images, and it's like this gentle, like, you can feel the change in the air, but it's like, it's not there. So it's like you kind of like suffocating underneath of it. And I think it was that Saturday when I took the time cover, it was kids that started the uprising. A lot of people don't understand that. It wasn't adults, it was kids in high school that were clashing with police that started everything. And I didn't realize the weight of the work until, you had the successor, and it's interviews, and then you're right back on the front lines, and then you get tear gas, and then, you're worrying your mother calling you, and you're watching your friends get snatched up on Pennsylvania Avenue. It was a lot. And I think the moment that changed me the most is the fact that in the process of that, my mother had to call the police on me because I was suicidal. And it got to the point where I just broke, a lot of, when I first started, I hid it for a while, and now I speak of it probably because I know my story and I've seen what it can do to you. So I share this openly because I was the tallest on the ground. When they went through it in 2020, they leaned on me. It was like, this is what got me through. But to have my mom call the police, and the police come get me because I am suicidal at this point, and the police officers know who I am. So they put me in like the paddy, I'm not the paddy one, but the back of the police car, and take me to the hospital. And they tell me how much I got to live for, which is ironic, because they know the work. And it was kind of like a wake-up call. It's one of those moments I had to break because it made me stronger. And I was able to come back better tenfold. I was able to come back and, start to activate the next generation. And at this protest, this is one of the things that kind of inspired me, seeing kids on the front line with these things that I witnessed watching movies and learning about in school, and my mother would tell me about, my grandma would tell me about. Now I'm living it. But I was able to intervene and control the narrative and help shape it. And I wondered, what if there's more Devin Allen right here at this moment? And this image was actually taken at a kids were protesting at City Hall, not just with Freddie Gray, but also about education and underfunding in the community. Then I was like, all right, so photographs, and that's not enough for me. What does my activism actually look like? Because everyone started labeling me an activist, like, no, I'm just a concerned citizen at this point. And I just started teaching. I started giving out cameras and started teaching kids and start, allowing them to speak for themselves and activate their voices and teaching them the power behind the camera, and teaching them about Gordon and sharing those stories so therefore they can tell their own stories.
So let's talk about, thank you. Let's talk about the joy in your work. The joy. Joy. And the image, Beautiful Ghetto, from the Beautiful Ghetto series, where you have this photo montage of Black people on the stoop, children playing, and superimposed is a woman who's really at the forefront, and in my view, she's on the right, probably the left. She's on the right there. Tell us about this image as it relates to life in West Baltimore, your experiences as a Baltimorean, and having it as a testament to our everyday lives and the joy that we share and the love that we share in our community.
So what I started to do with my work is, I didn't have, I'm lucky enough now that I've met other artists and I've been able to move and travel, but, photography has its limitations for me, where it allows me to digest the world and I regurgitate it to everybody else. So during COVID, I had time to sit, I started painting and started writing again and started just, expanding on my art because I've been living in the uprising state of mind where I've been creating the same body of work, because it was needed, but I had COVID gave me time to take a step. It kind of didn't, because I still, George Floyd happened and Tony McDade and Breonna Taylor, and I found myself 5 years later back on the front lines, had another time cover. But what I learned with resistance and joy is just the everyday life, I find that smallest things, that we do is a form of activism and resistance. If you think about, I think about like the grandma who sell the icy cups on the corner, or I remember my homeboy grandma who used to sell loose ones and cigarettes. And, it's like these little things that add to the experience of the community that we overlook. That's part of everyday life that's actually showing resistance and finding ways around a system, that we have. That we always are evolving around and changing. And I really wanted, when I started to do the collage work, I wanted to show just the layers of it, of people just living. And a lot of times that's overlooked, and as in photography, I wanted to shed light and create imagery that people can self-reflect on. You'll be surprised in this day and age how many people don't have images of themselves. If they do have an image of themselves, it's on a phone. It's not like back in the day, I'm in the process of fixing up my childhood house and I'm going through, years and years of imagery that my grandmother was capturing. And I was like, oh, snap, she's the first photographer that I actually knew. But it was like pictures at the cookout. And these are the moments that I think are very, very important. And a lot of his work is inspired by Eric Thompson, too. He had an amazing film that was given to me by Aaron Bryant called Through a Lens Darkly. That talks about the black family and our history living inside of our homes. That we are not a part of the greater American story, but we are in our homes. So I started to create imagery and collage work and paint, not only about my experience, but just things that I walk past every day that inspired me. And that's kind of what the image is. You can see in the corner is two guys walking with twin boys on their shoulders, and then you can see the kids swinging from the bars and other two kids looking at them. But then two older guys sitting on the stoop showing, just multiple generations. And you can see the mom in the corner store putting something in her pocket. And you can see the kids with the boxing gloves, because they were standing at the corner store on Pennsylvania Avenue. And it was like we live these complex but simplistic lives in the hood, but it's so beautiful because despite everything under, the oppression, there's still joy there, and we still are functional. And I just wanted to show that.
Thank you for capturing these beautiful moments of our humanity. So Wesley, turning to you now. Wesley Clark was born in Washington, D.C. and raised in Silver Spring, Maryland. He is an artist who works primarily in sculpture, installation, and mixed media. He is known for his conceptual approach to art, often exploring themes related to identity, social justice, and history. The works in this exhibition address reparations, inequality, healing, and self-preservation, providing important insights into some of the most pressing issues of our time. Wes, your work often explores themes related to racial socialization and self-empowerment. Can you speak to why these topics are important to you?
So, subject-wise, why these topics are important to me. I think, well, one, now I'm a father, and thinking about, the future, and just, the world we're leaving behind, the legacy. I think about how I was raised, how my father raised me, how my mother raised me, and wanting to do something, wanting to speak to something that is going to help improve life. And so, I guess I'm a quiet person in general, when out in public, and yet this is how I speak to, anything that I care about is through art. And so you want to make, a statement, you want to speak to something of power. So, these are things that I think about constantly in my head, just, on various scales. And so it really becomes a thing for me. It's like, well, an interesting way to bring this conversation out to the public, and I mean in a way that they'll think about it, that may stick with them. And so yeah, that's constantly just my main thing. It's just like, how do I get people to think about some of these issues from a completely different perspective, a completely different way? Hence using the crossword puzzle as a vehicle to bring about some of the conversations. It's something that I didn't grow up doing crossword puzzles, and I'm still not good at them now. I believe I saw my father doing them at occasion. This is Ken Clark, shout out to him. So I keep pointing to this guy here. That's why. I see people do them, and I always wanted to be good at them, but here was a way for me to create my own. And I realized, for instance, like it was a way of putting words, because oftentimes I write lists of just was a stream of consciousness. Right, one word begets another, and you're able to, in those, each word makes me think of various ideas. It's like, well, how do you put all these ideas into a painting, right? And so I realized it's like, well, I just use the words themselves in this format, and it all kind of actually worked out, and it's been successful thus far. But again, it's really just about putting the words together and seeing how they make you think about things. In this case, it's companies, right? Sorry, am I jumping ahead?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. So for this exhibition, your works fall into two categories: resistance and joy.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about the two puzzles that you created, which were actually from a concept that you had a few years ago and part of an exhibition titled Reparations. Some things are just owed, and some more than others. And so we have Profiteers 1 and 2, which are puzzles that investigate the economics of slavery and the commodification of Black bodies through what appears to be simple crossword puzzles. However, under closer observation, viewers realize they are being confronted with a painful truth. In Profiteers 1, enslavement reveals the names of corporations that profited from the transatlantic slave trade, and many of which continue to operate today, namely Lehman Brothers and J.P. Morgan. So do you want to talk about it from a historic perspective, and then we can go into Profiteers 2 and talk about the industrial complex.
So, I believe the idea initially came for this project, or for this piece, around, which kind of became hand in hand. I was listening to Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow on audiobook, because I'm constantly audiobooking. And it made me wonder, she was speaking about mass incarceration, I believe, and she may have touched on this fact as well, I can't remember specifically, but it made me wonder just how many companies are still around that were, that profited from slavery. I'd never thought about it, and I was surprised, to see, like, oh, there's plenty, and I think it was also realizing, like, around that time, I think like Georgetown University had acknowledged that they had owned slaves and that they had sold, and so it's really just that simple question and investigation. It was like, how many? And these that are still in existence and still operating, and there are more, but than what I listed here. But it's even then you kind of have to decide, because companies, they're separate entities, so to speak, and they get bought out by this one, and this one gets bought by that one, and so on and so on. But it's like, so these, for the most part, had a pretty solid lineage, straight through, from then to now, and that was kind of why I specifically focused on these companies.
And then in Profiteers 2, imprisonment, companies benefiting from today's modern form of slavery, the prison industrial complex, are eerily connected as their names overlap on the puzzle board. Among them, Walmart, General Motors,
Verizon, and Chrysler. So can you explain how they profit from?
So it's also funny because as I'm looking at it, you realize like just how interconnected all of this is, right? When the fact that you can make a crossword puzzle out of all these companies, it's much like a web in which our economics work. So, for instance, I'm trying to think to begin with who is it as an example. So, Bank of America, if I recall, they are like when prisoners come out, they have essentially cards, right? Debit cards, just like everyone else, but yet they're charged at a higher rate than we are. As far as just to be able to pull money out, even at a teller, like going straight to the teller, they're charged. They're also, I believe that's also what the commissary money was used, was also managed through them as well. Who was another one? That was a good one. I mean, it's so Pepsi, for instance. I didn't think I cared about Pepsi being on the list per se because I don't drink Pepsi, but I didn't realize Pepsi owned all the little snack companies that my kids are eating. And whether it's like these little crackers with the peanut butter on them, and that's Pepsi. And I was like, man, they got me, And I was looking at the list, and Verizon, I just switched to a 2-year contract. It's like I literally just switched, but I think it was Comcast. I think it's on the list too. And so you realize, like, how do you get away from these folks, right? Or that becomes the question. And I mean, so as far as when it comes to mass incarceration, I mean, like they're getting on both ends, and so they're scooping us up and bringing us in and to feed the machine, and yet then we're also paying. They're giving our dollars on the back end, right? So the reason for my even thinking about all of this really was from an economic standpoint of like, what do we do? What can we do, right? And I was looking at each of these companies as being in an industry that we could start a business in, right? We always wonder like, what should I do? For those that wonder, what should I do? What can I do? And that want to start a business. And you were saying just like, this is the everyday resistance, right? To some degree, it's my not buying those little crackers for my kids now that I know. Switching banks, supporting more of the black banks that are there, what have you. So, it is insidious because the list that is there. I mean, your toilet paper is probably coming from every little thing can be connected, and so it is something to just consider if you don't want to participate in the mass incarceration system. What you can do to make that switch. And so it's really just about that bringing this to light is really all I was trying to do in here.
Thank you. I think you may have answered this in part, but I'll just read the question. And
sorry, I'm rambling.
No, but I love it. It's all interwoven. I love it. So you stated the intention behind the puzzles is to use them as a tool to help the Black community think about self-respect and to encourage the building and supporting of a Black economy. You've chosen to name these companies so we as consumers might seek better options. So tell me, what do you think about the relationship between art and activism and how you see your art contributing to efforts to address inequality and injustice?
So I think, this is an example of a piece where, it's about disseminating the information and getting it out there and people seeing it. And, I've had several responses to it, just like, just amazed. I was amazed. And so I think, art and activism can go together in that it's just a matter of presenting it. Sometimes it's because we see these things every day, or, many of us do. Some people have never seen it. I've had, a cat come to me while at one of my shows, disturbed, because he said he had never considered his race before until looking at one of his pieces, a young white cat. And, he was truly bothered. And at the time, I was kind of chuckling to myself. It was like, yeah, I think about this every day, homie. What you been doing? But that's activism, right? Like like that's what I'm doing, and that's the point of it. And that particular piece that he was looking at dealt with reparations as well, in the sense that it was another crossword puzzle where you could write in, you could fill in the answer, but every answer was reparations. And every clue on the little side thing that I built that had the clues carved in it was, obviously the answer was reparations, but it was listing all the various forms of reparations that America has given to various folks who are in different forms and this and that. And then on one side, I think so that was like a cross, and then down was like all the various definitions of it. And so it's kind of like once you answer it one time and you write it, and you answer it a second time, write it, and after a while you can't deny it, and that's the whole point. And so that that's what art does. Like it can just kind of seep into you and stick with you in a different format than the news or it might connect dots to you that you didn't realize. Like you're aware of this, you're aware of that, but you didn't really see how it all connected. And so that's what we do.
So let's move on and talk about the gift, which represents joy. So the gift offers concepts around healing work, whether from the present day or generational trauma, as a means of communal preparation and advancement. From your artist statement, you said, "As a husband, father, and son, I offer the gift to Black men and their progenies seeking emotional healing." In creating the work, you drew from Christian iconography to depict a loving encounter between a father and son. The subjects are formed in resin that appears as stained glass, rendered in the shape of a church window, symbolic of a religious temple, surrounded by lush foliage with soil at their feet. So one of the questions you pose to the viewer is in that they must determine if the heart in the Father's hand is being gifted to the Son or received from him. Your piece, you present this piece to convey messages of love and self-respect. So tell us, how do you personally identify with that piece and the experiences of Black man, and how does it influence the themes and messages in the gift?
So the gift is definitely a very personal piece in terms of just thinking about myself as a father, and really just even my own life. At a certain point, I realized that I walk in the world with this armor on me, right? And I used to say, like, at some points, like, it felt like I was melting, or my heart was melting at certain points, because I was responding and reacting to things, whether it was like, seeing a certain scene and, and it makes me tear up, and it's like, man, like, I never used to do that, And, you realize, like, just over time what that is. And so, long story short, I was thinking about how we raise our sons and how I'm raising my son and how I was raised. Now, that armor that I was talking about essentially is I buried my heart, right? So that when I'm out in the world, dealing with certain things, it's not hitting me and touching me in the same way. However, on the flip side of that is you realize you're not opening yourself up to, just the joy of various emotions in life and what have you. And so it was really about being a fuller human being, this idea of unburying one's heart, and so that I can give it to my son, so that I can give it to my daughter, my wife, and so that in return, we also can end up burying our own children's hearts in the means of trying to protect them. In terms of, whether it's a toughening up or, doing, things of that nature that either was done to us, which I had to think about it because my father didn't do that to me and my mother didn't do it to me, so where did I get that from? I had to question that also, just like, where did that come? Where did this armor per se come from in the sense of how I was living and walking the world? And also kind of realized as I was driving up here or riding up here that the music, I believe, had something to do with it, because around that time everybody was thugging, whether you were thugging, whether you actually were or not. You kind of had to, be prepared for someone else, whether they were thugging, and that was, the early gangster rap days. So Boys in the Hood and Menace to Society had come out, and everybody wanted to be Oprah from the movie. And so, you realize now with distance how much that does play a role in that, right? And because at the time I never wanted to blame the music because I was enjoying it and listening to it. And I still enjoy and listen to it now, but I recognize, there is a taint. And I think part of that taint is that armor that we put on, because then everyone is beginning to act and behave in a certain way. So anyway, it was really just, again, how we're raising our children and how we're allowing them to live a more fuller emotional life is really what I was trying to get at with that. And the unburying of my son's heart, my own heart, showing him my heart, giving him his heart. So you can read it in multiple ways, but it is really just a celebration of that, of being a fuller, more emotional human being.
So the last question is, in the past you also shared that this piece was informed by Dr. Joy DeGruy, who writes about post-traumatic slave syndrome, in which she encourages us to internalize the discussion of reparations to include what we as Black Americans owe ourselves. Explain to us what Dr. DeGruy's theory means to you and how it informed your work.
Ooh, that's a tough one. So Dr. DeGruy's work, it delves deep in many aspects of Black life, and this piece in particular, she speaks. There's a point in her book, and that's post-traumatic slave syndrome is what her theory is, and when people compliment your kids and say, "Oh, he's growing up to be such a young man." Oh, that little knucklehead, and da da da, and there's an immediate kind of, you kind of put them down a little bit, and it's not out of, not because you don't love them, but it's, as she's putting it, but it has been a form of protection from slavery when Master was looking at, oh, she's looking mighty fine, and you're like, no, this little ugly thing, because you're trying to protect her from, what his eyes and what that can mean, right? And so those little things that have slowly kind of transferred and on up into society is kind of where, that's just one instance of from, that I took from the book and where you, begin to pull, ideas like the gift from. I don't know if I answered everything.
Yes.
I think so.
So we're going to thank you, Wes, and we're going to go on to Chrystal now. Chrystal was born in Arkansas. She is now a Maryland-based artist and educator, working across painting, sculpture, video, and installation to explore how self-identified Black feminine and masculine persons perform femininity and masculinity within popular culture. For this exhibition, Chrystal's work examines resistance as a form of brotherhood, compellingly exploring where and how young Black men will express joy, grief, rage, camaraderie, and hope. The piece, Free Trade 5, is inspired by Slims, which takes its name from a Facebook post of a group of friends. Chrystal, your work examines the notion of Black femininity and masculinity as a social construct. Can you speak to why these topics are important to you?
I think a lot of my inquiry about gender comes from my experiences in the classroom. I've been an educator the last 8 years, and a lot of the impetus for my work really began in the summer of 2016 when I had the experience to teach probably about a group of 10 boys The ones who were always getting kicked out of class, the ones who were getting suspended constantly, were facing expulsion, or anyone, the ones who were being pushed out. And I remember talking to my principal and asking for permission to teach this book. The book was called Buck by M.K. Asante. And my principal and other teachers advised me that they're not going to read a book. They don't do anything. And so to me, that made me think that, you know, people assume that these boys had no spiritual interiority, you know, and like you, Devin, I've been attracted to the Black people who I think express like a full range of humanity. And it made me think about like the very essence of humanity. And I think those boys, they've always gravitated towards me. And I think they just, to me, show like the variability in humanity and the very essence of it. Like, and once I developed relationships with them, I started to question, like, who would I be if I didn't have reliable income, if I was food insecure, or if I didn't know where I would be sleeping that night, who would I be? And I just think like those boys and people like them are, you know, always judged based on like this behavior, but I've always thought that behavior was a form of communication. So I just became really curious, and what are they trying to communicate? And I remember we read the book and they became really animated, and I saw them reading, and I recorded videos and sent them out, and I was like, these boys are reading. And to your point where you talk about this armor, I began to think about, or just ask questions about their behavior as a form of protection, and like this idea of hypervigilance as like a behavioral response to protection. And there was, I think it was about 10 years ago, there was a study done in Baltimore with a group of young Black men, and they were studying hypervigilance, and the ones who were proactively more aggressive were more safe, and they didn't get quote unquote messed with. And so I really want my work to be really a mirror back to the subjects I make the work about. And it's not necessarily less about me trying to like speak on behalf of community. I just want them to be able to walk into a space with a social space we deem of value to see themselves.
Yes, thank you. So let's examine your piece, Free Tray 5, which is exhibited here under the theme of resistance. And the images are of a former student of yours. He and his friends serve as the subjects in this piece, which offers an investigation into a bond they form that provides a sense of place and being, despite the threat or experience of physical displacement in their everyday lives. So can you please share with us the backstory of these gentlemen that are?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. These two, I've taught both of them. The one holding the flag, his name is Bobby. And I remember I keep up with him every now and then. Bobby called me, like, I don't know, I think last year I spoke with him, and I told him that I was doing this painting about him. And he was like, you know what, after you left, I feel like because I started my teaching career in Arkansas, but later got recruited. But he said after you left, I got kicked out of school, and if you were still there, I probably would still be in school. So, I sometimes feel bad for leaving them. But by his side is Mustafa, and he is Tray 5. That's his moniker or whatever that he goes by, but he's serving a 12-year sentence. And these boys, they took this picture not like really close by to school. And yes, they would, you know, at lunchtime, maybe walk off campus, they would come back. But I think the larger story is like how they find a sense of belonging, you know, even under the threat of what they call, there's a term called hidden homelessness, whereas you're not necessarily out there on the street, you're just in different houses and, you know, just might be couch surfing. But they both didn't have a home at the time. And Mustafa has like 8 siblings, so he's always been very transient. And so they are, I really debated about making this piece because of the flag, because it does honor that they are both in quote unquote, I hate to use the word gangs, but I just see them as like a group of boys that are aligned on certain principles. But really I just think they were just finding a place to belong. I debated about it because I wondered how would people perceive them, would people judge them, and then I just really became less concerned about that, more concerned with can they see themselves. So I write to, Mustafa has a brother named Frangelo. I have a close relationship with him as well. And similar story, Frangelo is incarcerated right now back home because of petty stuff. And, sorry, I'm really trying not to cry because it's sad. It's really sad, and I think it just, I really tried, with students like these, I really tried to really just be there. I think my role as a teacher, my naiveness in the beginning was like, I'm gonna go in there and make a difference. I'm gonna change these kids' lives, but it's just not always like that. Like to your point, like Devin, being in those places where masses of people, Black children in particular, are underserved, they're undereducated. Sometimes that life is gonna be what that is, and I just focus on my role as not as someone trying to change them per se, but just to be there with them. And I think I became an educator is like, I guess, my form of activism. And I think that, you know, social change begins with education, and I think it's often like begins with a person shifting their mind about things. So I began to teach them about things that they had never learned about, to your point, Michelle Alexander, about incarceration, and then starting to realize that, you know, it was by design that they are where they are, and not some sense of like judgment on our own moral or some moral failure. And so I always tell people, I'm hoping that, like when you see boys like this, I always just tell them smile at them. You know? So
you said that this puzzle is a way that honors their lightheartedness, playfulness, and gentleness, and to remind us of their humanity. That the piece serves to validate their existence, identity, and respectability. And often, you know, you deploy like this simple materials in creating the puzzle, but the result is the manifestation of this profound statement to remind us of the vulnerability of these young men, the fragility of their lives, and the circumstances of injustice and inequality and discrimination that, you know, we in our communities deal with. This is why I'm so emotional about this as a mother of 3 men and a grandmother of 6, 5 of which are Black men. And when I look and think about what this world possesses, and that is the good and the resistance and the love and the amount of healing that needs to take place in our communities, I'm really strongly impacted by the imagery that you create. It resonates with me so deeply on a personal level because of my fears as a Black mother, as a grandmother, as a daughter, married to this extraordinary Black man, and wondering when we can lower the armor and live our full lives and humanity without fear, without concern that the next encounter may be an innocent one or one that in which our lives might end. So I think that is one of the reasons why your puzzle moved me so much. And so that everything that's in this exhibition mirrors my life in some way or another. And that's why I am finding myself so emotional today, because listening to you speak about it in ways that in many cases I haven't even thought about, or with your work I'm revisiting the conversations that we had around reparations, and not only what that means in terms of what we hope this country will at some point do for us, but the responsibility that we have to ourselves and our communities and to our families, because no one's going to come and save us is the truth and the reality of the situation and circumstances. And so, I was, Devin, and thinking about your work and reading about Frederick Douglass, who in another life I thought I was going to marry, because I keep telling my husband he's the only man that could take you away from me, reappear at some point. And he actually spoke in this very sanctuary years ago. So thinking about that, and Frederick Douglass knowing the power of the image, right? And during his era, he was the most photographed American at that time, and he knew what that image, the power of his image meant, and how it could dispel stereotypes. And he wanted to depict and be captured in the greatest dignity, and to display his dignity. And so going back to your piece, while those young men may have been misjudged, you have taken upon yourself as an artist and a compassionate person to remind us that there is a heart there, there is a human being there, and whose lives have been impacted by so many things that were out of their control, right? But yet you've chosen to honor them. So I honor you and thank you. Just trying to hold it together here.
Do not worry about it.
Let it out.
This exhibition has been transformative. Where's Chanel? It's your fault. So let me move on before I completely lose it up here. So let's talk about, let's get in the weeds for a little bit here. And one of the subjects in your piece is holding a red bandana, which, you touched on a little bit, but I want to delve into it a little bit more deeply. The game symbol, because that has been a question by some of the visitors, and to ask if that is really symbolic of why it's there. And if so, can you explain why you chose to include it? Because you could have easily have left it out.
I think the bandana is definitely a focal point for sure. And I think when they took this picture, they're not thinking some artist is going to take this picture and render it and it's going to be displayed in a museum. I think they were just really being themselves and displaying their identities. And at that time, that's who they were. I mean, they were in this picture, I think they were 17 and 18. So they're still kids. And there were two pictures that I debated making, and there was one without the flag. And then, me being myself, I always lean right on into controversy, even in the classroom, because I think controversy is where change lives, or the most potential for change can live. And I wanted it to be a talking piece And I chose the colors because I think it most represents who I know them to be, and I also wanted to honor their camaraderie in the red. I don't want to mention we again, I wanted them to sing themselves. As soon as I sent them the finished piece, I mean, Bobby, the one that is holding the flag, Bobby smiled the hardest I've seen him smile in a very long time. So he felt very proud, and he felt honored. And I've never known either of these boys to be violent. Of course, I'm not following them wherever they go, but generally they're very gentle people. And I just remember in my coveted classroom space, where I really tried my best to make sure that they felt safe, I do remember it's like they would enter my classroom and disarm a bit. You know, they would raise their hands, they would contribute to discussion, they would be making their peers laugh, and they would be asking very great, like, rich questions. And so I really just wanted to do them a service and not censor them. So that's why I chose the flag, because I didn't want to censor who they were at the time. I really wanted to honor them as the church say, as they are.
I love that. I think you created a safe place in your classroom for them to be themselves. And then in creating the puzzle, you maintained their truth. And I'm sure that's why the response and the joy, the joyous response was there. Thank you, Chrystal, so much. So I would like to ask if you all would like to join us by posing questions to the artist. I mean, I have a few more, but time is of the essence, so I'll give you an opportunity to pose questions, if you like.
Not a question, but a comment.
A comment, yes.
To all of you. You've touched people's lives. They've had a break from your presence. They want to do something with their lives based on what you did with them as young boys. Please remember that. You've touched their lives. You did nothing else except put your hand on their shoulder. You touched their lives. You touch a mind. All right?
Thank you. Yes, would you please stand?
First of all, thank you. I'm grateful and I'm grateful as well today. Devin, you talked about supporting, right? And how you had to come back. How do you maintain yourself in the midst of all? I'm an educator.
I'm gonna say it's the community. You know, I'm lucky enough to have a strong family core that's there for me. You know, and I've learned when to take breaks. You know, not to burn myself out. But I've seen the change from the work that I've done. You know, I've given out I stopped counting at 600 cameras given out to the youth beyond Baltimore, Oakland, you know, Mosquito Museum of Harlem. But I've seen the change in my community where, you know, it brings me joy, like when I get DMs from kids when they did a project on it, or I see kids walking down the street and they got a camera in their back pocket that I gave them years ago. And I say, you still got that? She's like, I ain't using this, not going nowhere. You know, seeing my kids change, you know, and transform. You know, I had one of my kids is at the Baltimore School of Arts right now. One of my kids, you know, he ended up getting accepted to NYU for a ride. You know, so the work that I'm doing, you know, just activating the youth, I'm seeing the change. So anytime that I do feel like what I'm doing is not working, you know, I just think about the kids that I've been able to touch, and you know, even the work that I do, and it's like a lot of my work end up on obituaries, you know, which is sad. But I think even in the joy in that is when the families come back to me and they request the work, you know, because, you know, they probably some of those proud images they have of their loved one, you know, and that also makes me work even harder for the community. You know, I think like last year I lost like 2 friends to fentanyl, and like 3 of my friends were murdered in Baltimore, one in downtown Baltimore, but, I always, still got that picture, or you still have this picture, and, sadly enough, that's how the work is remembered, but, you see the smile, you see what they might show on the news as the most negative picture they can find, but I might have the most beautiful picture, the most humbling picture, the most loving picture, and that what continues to work. So in those moments when my morale is low, I turn to my community, and then they always there, they always wrap their arms around me. So the community keeps me pushing because I'm seeing the change in the next generation.
Any other questions? I'll ask.
So, what advice would you give to other artists who are interested in exploring themes of systemic racism and inequality in your own work?
My biggest, I live in the real world, and I know how it feels to not have a voice, not have a platform. And a lot of times I always thought like, this is life, this just is what it is. I can't change it, I'm born into it, I'm just going to live. I done planned my life past 21. And what I would tell any artist that wants to, just do it, just do the work, do the research, just put your good foot forward. But I will say that the work is most impactful if you hear all of us talking, you hear the passion in our voice. So I always tell artists, they even ask me this question, I get this question often, just make sure the work that you're creating is from the heart. Because you can create the work anyone can create, but if your essence is not in it, your soul is not in it, and that emotion is not there, that care is not there, it can be very detrimental to, and actually takes a step backwards instead of forward. So I always tell people that, create what works for you, and look within, and that dictates what you create.
Thank you.
To your point, I would say if you're interested in it, make sure you're doing the work. For me, a lot of my work comes about only after I spent a lot of time reading. And I think I often see people try to make their subjects fit their perspectives and their narratives, but I think that's doing the work backwards. And it's really the subjects who are driving the work for me. And because we live in academia, like it does speak to the social, and those points will be there. They're like, to your point, Wes, that your kids eat products, Pepsi products, and you made the connection from the real world to the academia. So it's just making sure that those two connect. And that's why I would say to focus on too, and really just to focus on like who your subjects are and not trying to make them be something that they're not.
I would probably, again, go with what Devin was saying, essentially that start with yourself first in terms of what affects you, what you're thinking about, how do you feel about it, and then how do your friends feel about it. And then, so you start with yourself, and then that next circle, that next wider circle, and see how it's affecting it in working with them. I remember one of the best critiques that stuck with me, I was showing at a site conference years ago, and this one woman came through and was commenting on the work and said, it's great, and she was like, but where are you in the work? And I didn't know I had no clue what she meant. And she pointed at one picture and was like, that protest, like that was me, that was my generation. Where are you? And I never thought about that before, right? And so now, this is 20 years ago probably, when she's telling me, and I've clearly kept it with me, and this is what I tell other folks, is make sure that you are pulling from yourself. And because, like you said, that passion, it will come through, and it's more authentic, and how you are putting it out. I used to say, I was a painter, and it took me a while to even say I was a sculptor. but it's really the idea drives the medium that I work in. And so being open to explore what vehicle best pushes your message forward. As you can see, I'm working with resin and latex paint on wood panels for the crosswalk. So I'm bouncing around because I felt like those were the ones that carried the message best.
I've always believed that the most compelling work is driven and informed by the artist's personal experiences. I think we have one last question.
And to that point of the personal experience, so in my day job, I would pour myself out in the same way that you all do as artists, as communities. And so I guess my question is one, it's twofold. One, what do you do to nourish yourself in that process so that you are not sort of draining yourself completely to be able to continue to offer this to the world? And then I guess the second question is, what can we do as the public to boost and nourish artists, either personally or in general, so that the creativity is supported, is sustained? Is it advocacy? Is it participating in events like this? Is it simply buying art? I'm curious about from your perspective as well.
I think what nourishes me is I always have to take a step back. And even watching TV for me doesn't give me relief because I'm an educator, my brain is always critiquing and stuff. So I watch like old cartoons, or I might read a book that has absolutely nothing to do with my subject matter, like whatsoever. Like right now I'm reading The Matter of Everything, and it's about physics. And I have no desire to pursue that. So that's what nourishes me, spending time with, I have 3 sons, Black sons as well. Spending time with them, my wife, my family. And to your point, my artist work is always nourishes us. It is, we are artists and we have to live and eat in this world, and it's just affirming that someone really values and appreciates the work in this thing. It's like affirmation of the passion that we put into the work.
So I smiled as soon as you said that. That was my first thought. Was buy that work, David. But I too will take breaks, because for instance, this work was shown in 19 was when that reparations show, and it took me a good while, to get out from under it in a way, because it's so easy to pile on, and then with your own studies of what you're doing, but then life is also happening, right? So I still to this day haven't watched the George Floyd video because of that, and so there's certain ways of protecting yourself that makes sense. Definitely taking the break. Oh, there was something else I was going to say though. Oh, I forgot it. Okay, then. I was going to see the wiggle out.
I'm gonna tag on that, definitely buy the art. I'm gonna tag right on that. And for me, I don't do nothing. Like having nothing to do, no urgency. I think as artists, it's we worry about creating, and I used to feel bad if I'm not creating, I'm wasting time. I didn't take a picture today. I ain't do this today. I love doing nothing. I would binge watch something on Netflix. Go get on my mother nerves. I don't know. I have a 13-year-old daughter who's giving me a run for my money right now. But I find moments of being still, being around family, even revisiting the old neighborhood, sitting on the street with my childhood friends, and because to them I'm the one that made it out. So anytime I show back up, it's a party, and it's always love there. And I think a lot of times also, beyond even just buying the art, which is very, very important, because people just buy art just to buy it. People, I want to buy your art. And then when I send you a Zoom link, I want to talk to you, I want to know why you buy my work. People get thrown off by that, because a lot of times when they meet artists, they working through galleries and all these different things, but my work is it's my heart. You're taking a piece of me. I want to know why you want this in your house, why you want this in your collection, because this is me. People say, oh, you got a studio? Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I always say the streets is my studio. I'm always in the streets. People see me walking around Baltimore. I walk from east to west. They're like, you're not scared? Like, no. I'm walking with abundance of love and joy through all neighborhoods, projects, everything. The streets the pavement is my studio. And I think also just the sharing of the work is very, very, very important. Sharing and educating. Not only like, oh, this is an amazing photo, this is an amazing piece of art, but understanding our processes, understanding why we create, understanding our goals of the work is very important too. So also just educating people about our work and the type of artists that we are and what we stand for. Because there's a lot of artists that might do similar work to us, but what all sets us apart is the fact that we're so invested in it and we do the work beyond the work. It's not just creating the work, but also that is just a vehicle to get our points across. And we do the work after the work is done and we're still doing it. And I think that's what sets a lot of artists apart. Some people create just to create, and other people create to make change and do the work afterwards and keep pushing.
I remember what it was. So, I think this was just yesterday. I was on IG, Instagram, and saw, random post was like, how to support, an artist. And it was a simple thing. It was like, just like and make a comment. And I was like, oh, that's, she's like, it's affirming. It, keeps us knowing that, what we're doing is being seen, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, oh, that's a cool thought. But then later that day, I got an email just doing that, where someone was just to say hi, and that they liked the work and this and that. And I thought about that same post that I just saw, completely, hours apart, and it was affirming, and it did feel good. So, just from a simple, base level, that was excellent. She basically sent a like via email, and then also she just commented on the work. Simple. That's the light stuff.
Thanks, Wes. Well, I want to thank you all. This is a very dynamic conversation. I thank you all for joining us today. So I want to ask, you said one of my favorite words, and that's being still. I guess that's 2 words. As we close out the program, I would like for Felicia G's video to be played, and would like to ask all of you to just be still for a moment and listen to it. It's 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That's the length of time that the police officer knelt on George Floyd's neck. This video is about healing.
Thank you all for being so patient.
So, Myrtis,
Yes.
while we're thinking about this being George Washington President's Weekend, think about the fact that among the first resistors were his slaves who got taken to Philadelphia. And read the story of Only Judge, the slave woman who escaped from there.
Yes.
And then stayed away from it, and she got into some Rhode Island someplace. But she resisted, kept fighting not to go back. But he also had a second slave to his chef also disappeared out of Philadelphia. And of course, Washington took slaves there against the law of Philadelphia. They weren't supposed to bring slaves to Philadelphia. They were released in 8 months. He kept rotating them back to Virginia.
Right. I think if they stayed in Philadelphia for 6 months, then they would be declared free. And
Right.
the chef's name was Hercules.
Hercules, right.
Yes.
this art exhibition that we masterfully curated, and they love it. So they'll be creating artwork that will be on display here in June. You'll love it. If you come out and show some support, their first project is a photo project. And they are just so taken aback every time they come to the museum and learn about the artwork. So thank you all for coming here today. Commissioner Tony Spencer, we got members of the foundation, the committee.